We're talking about eukaryotic microorganisms today. That is, microorganisms that have a nucleus, other organelles. The first we're going to talk about are fungi, fungus. And the study of fungus is mycology. I'm sure you're all going to want to go into that someday. Anyway, okay. Few fungi are pathogenic and virulent. Pathogenic means it can make you sick. Virulent means it's a very hot pathogen, make you very, very sick. There are some, though, that can have problems with you. More are just in the environment, involved in decomposition, so we don't have dead armadillos stacked up to the sky. Mycorrhiza are the fungi on the roots of plants. Now, what this does is these little mycorrhiza, or little stringy type things on the roots, they greatly increase the surface area for the roots of the plants, and so the plants can grow, absorb water, and grow much faster. More water, more other nutrients, nitrogen, other minerals out of the soil. Now, the mycorrhiza, in turn, do steal some energy from the plants, but it all works out to be a fantastic relationship, a symbiotic relationship that is mutualistically beneficial. Okay, fungal characteristics. Fungal colonies are vegetative. They grow. They can grow as filamentous, and they can be multicellular organisms, and they form filaments that are called hyphae. And I think we'll just look at these here in just a minute. They can be tiny or immense, free-living, and heterotrophic. Well, they are free-living and heterotrophic. Heterotrophic means they have to eat stuff. They can be yeast, molds, or fleshy fungi, which are like a mushroom, and they have a cell wall. Remember, animals don't have cell walls. Some organisms do, such as bacteria, most bacteria, and theirs is made of chitin. They differ from plants in that they do not contain chlorophyll, they do not photosynthesize, and their ribosomal RNA is an 80S, and that's not real relevant to us. Some fungi, though they're not actually a problem in themselves, they produce toxins. Ergot toxins, psychotropic toxins, and aflatoxins. I know that my nephew called me in a panic. His dog, his beloved dog, was running around into walls, seizuring, kept throwing up, which was good. And I said, take it to the emergency vet right now. And they induced more vomiting, and it had a bunch of mushrooms in it. It ate the mushrooms that were toxic. Now, some of the psychedelic mushrooms in high enough doses can kill you, but some toxic mushrooms actually contain a digitalis organism that is going to be fatal to you, so don't just try eating them. Also, aflatoxins. Some of these get into peanuts and corn and cause toxins to be there. Test for them, though. Yeast is a single cell form of a fungus. They reproduce by budding, and they could become multicellular by connecting together their budding cells. And here is a spore. This is a single cell yeast. And here they bunch together, and they have hyphae or pseudohyphae connecting them together. And this, if you're looking in at a vaginal smear, it'll probably look a lot like this if they have a bad yeast infection. Just these, they're way bigger than bacteria, and they do have a nucleus, so these don't show up really well. You can see a nucleus here, and here, and here, so there are some. And you may also see hyphae in places that they're connected. If you were looking at an ear smear of a stinky fungal ear, you would probably just see the yeast formation. Okay, molds rapidly grow. They reproduce asexually, and they develop hyphae and develop that classic mold culture. This hyphae, which are the stringy things on molds, may be septate. They're divided into sections, and these lines are your septums. Or they may be coenocytic hyphae. They don't have lines, they're not septate. And in an appropriate environment, hyphae grow to form mycelium. They get bigger and bigger batches of them. Okay, Penicillium and Saccharomyces. I don't know why I left that picture there. I think I just like that picture of the Penicillium a lot. Dimorphic fungi can grow as yeasts, or they can grow as a mold, and depends on the temperature and environment in general, and they are called dimorphic fungi. They can change the shape they're in. Molds with septate hyphae, their natural environment at 25 degrees Celsius, they're just going to be a mold. But then as you get into body temperatures, they can transform into a yeast form that are easily inhaled and can cause systemic disease, a systemic mycosis. That's why when mold gets into a building and takes over and gets into the walls and is into the air conditioning system, you can get, they call it a sick building syndrome. People start getting sick. And I know a woman who worked in a building like this, and she had to go in over and over and get blood tests. She never did get sick, but they just were so sure she would that they aggravated her half to death. But it can be a serious issue. Okay, life cycle of fungi. All have some form of asexual reproduction. Most also reproduce sexually given the right opportunity. Asexual may be by budding. They just bud a piece off, similar to binary fission. Filamentous fungi can just break off hyphae, and they may form spores. It's all asexual. They may form spores, sporangia, that release spores into the environment, and these are what you're going to get infected with. Okay, and these are some different spores that you can, for your viewing pleasure, the different types. You have little, these look like the dog treats I give my dogs. These look like yeast. Okay, sexual reproduction. The advantage of sexual reproduction in any species is it introduces genetic variation. Now, this is a good time to move away from the real subject for just a second. Genetic variation makes any species strong. If we were all identical, if no one was different than anyone else, then some little virus goes through, well, like one just has, we'd all die because we're identical. So the more diversity any population has, the stronger that population is. Okay, sexual reproduction in fungi generally occurs when nutrients are limited or you have unfavorable conditions. Mating types are not male and female, but plus and negative. Okay, fungal spores are very small, lightweight, they float around in the air, water, you can breathe them in. Then they germinate when they get into a favorable environment and then start growing again. Classification, we're just going to go through a few. Zygomycota, these are saprobes. That means they eat dead stuff. Ascomycota, these are big on spoiling food, and I have some green beans in my refrigerator that probably have some of these growing on them right now. Beneficial because of Penicillium fungi. That's how they discovered penicillin. Okay, Bassamycota, this is mushrooms with their fruiting bodies. Now the mushroom that you eat on your pizza is only the reproductive parts of the fungus. Most of that fungus lives underground. Deuteromycota are called imperfect fungi. They may have a way they reproduce sexually, but nobody knows what it is. Now, lichens are interesting because they're really not truly just a fungus. They're actually two organisms for the price of one. They're a symbiotic, mutualistic relationship between a fungus and either a cyanobacteria and a green algae. And the algae provides the nutrition, the photosynthesis, the sugars. The fungus absorbs water. It gives a safe place for the algae to hang out. It collects water, rainwater, and generally you'll find these on trees. The fungus also can pull nutrition out of possibly the tree, certainly out of rainwater, and the two work together and act as one organism. This is a fleshy fungus mushroom. This is what lichen looks like. You can just peel it right off that piece of bark. Algae are the next thing we're going to talk about. We're still on eukaryotes. Photosynthetic organisms. They're water organisms, a big part of plankton. Important in they produce a whole lot of oxygen and absorb a whole lot of carbon dioxide. They can be found in soil and on rocks if you have enough moisture, or even in some plants, hot springs, or even in snowbanks. In very cold places there are some algae that survive. Medical concern with algae is when you have toxins produced by them. Dinoflagellates produce the red tide, and the water apparently just turns red. Now, marine animals eat these dinoflagellates, and you may see dead fish in the area. If the water is red and you see dead fish, don't eat fish. But they'll close the places down. You apparently can get sick just playing out in the water. But eating the shellfish is the most toxic, apparently maybe because they're bottom feeders. But the toxin can persist in your body for months, and it's a neurotoxin, and it can kill you. Okay, two things in common with all algae. They're all photosynthetic. They all have to have some sort of aquatic environment, and there's not anything unified about them. They differ in all kinds of ways. This is showing they can sexually reproduce, they can asexually reproduce. I may have done that back, but that's asexual, that's sexual. Okay, classifications. Chlorophyta, this is green algae. Pigments, chlorophyll A and B, and they live in fresh water, and they're good unless you get over-fertilization in that pond, and then they could form a scum. Say if this is your pond, I should have really green here. They form a green layer on the top, and oxygen can't get in because this is so thick. And so you start seeing dead fish all on the bank, and that's not a good thing. Here's Chlorophyta, just pictures of them, microscopic pictures. Okay, Rhodophyta, I might as well use red for that, contain red pigment, and this is what they make agar out of. Also thickeners for soups, jellies, and ice cream. So if you want to eat algae, basically a seaweed thing, in your ice cream, don't read the ingredients. If you read the ingredients, there should be no word you don't understand. If they should have things like sugar, milk, cream, chocolate, that kind of thing. Okay, Phytophyta, brown algae, and they have chlorophyll, keratin, and brown pigment. This is Chrysophyta, and they're interesting because they have silica cell walls. These are your diatoms, and I got a picture of them. These are microscopic, and you can see there's a big variety. There's different types of diatoms. Now, when these die, all that's left is a silica shell, and they wash up on the beach. And that's what sand is made up of, is many, many thousands, hundreds, and millions, and jillions of diatoms that died at some point, many, many years. Protozoans are defined by three common characteristics. They're eukaryotes, they're unicellular, and they lack a cell wall, so they're squishy. Many are free-living, others are parasites of humans and other animals. Most are modal, that means they can move, due to cilia, flagella, or pseudopods. A pseudopod, we'll draw, this is really easy to draw an amoeba because they don't look like anything but a blob, and I could draw a blob. But if that amoeba comes in contact with, we'll give it a different color. Here's your food. Now I'll go back to the amoeba. It forms pseudopods, so it oozes forth its cytoplasm around this, and then it takes this in, and this needs erasing, but it won't let me do it without doing my entire beautiful amoeba, which it still won't let me erase it. Yeah, it let me erase my amoeba. Too bad. Okay, but pseudopods are important in amoebas and many other organisms. Okay, protozoans, they do exist in a modal state, and a modal or movable feeding state of a protozoan is called a trophozoite. When the environment is unfavorable, they may enter a dormant stage called a cyst, and these cysts may be infectious and cause things such as amoebic dysentery. Life cycle of protozoans is a huge range, and it's really almost silly to put them in one place, but there's some terms here we need to go through. Some exist as trophozoites only, those are swimmies. Some alternate between trophozoite and cyst stage. The main method of reproduction is asexual, and schizogony is important. And this is a big thing. I remember having to look this up when I studied malaria. But in a red blood cell, you have the one, let's make a cell here, you have the one little, we'll make him blue, the one little malaria organism, and then it's going to reproduce the nuclei, just the nuclei. I guess we should give it a cell there, the nuclei, and it gets bigger and it gets bigger because it's reproducing. And so you take one and it may have 400 nuclei, which then wrap around and make cells of cells. These burst out into the bloodstream and infect, that was supposed to be 400 new red blood cells, and then that life cycle continues. Okay, some reproduce by conjugation. Protozoans may have two nuclei. A stentor is one of my favorite protozoans. I need to pull up some pictures of stentors. But they have two nuclei. They have a macronucleus that's responsible for growth and metabolism of the organism, and then haploid, that means half a cell of, half a dose of the DNA they need. And these are specialized for conjugation. Two cells fuse, they migrate up to each other, combine these haploid state, reproduce, divide them back up, and then protozoans can colonize and infect various areas of the body. Trichomonas vaginalis. This is trick. This is the one that produces the sexually transmitted infection that produces the green fishy discharge. And then we have Giardia lamblia, which is in bodies of water where animals have defecated, and it gives you diarrhea. Humans get it, dogs and cats can get it as well. Okay, this is a Giardia, the picture of it. They told me in school it looked like a monkey face, and I stared and stared, and I think it looks more like a fish with a tail and two eyeballs. But there he is, two nuclei. The microspora are obligate intercellular parasites. Ciliophora, the only one that is a human pathogen, is Bacillium coli. We'll study that more later. Euglenosa, this is it's pretty cool because with euglenas, they're photoautotrophic. They can photosynthesize, and they have an eye spot that senses light and pulls that organism towards the light. But they can also ingest organic material. So they have it both ways. They can eat or they can photosynthesize. Amoebas, Entamoeba histolytica. These are the pseudopod guys. This causes amoebic dysentery. That's also known as screaming squirts, and they could cause dehydration and death. Now this is a kind of bad one, Naegleria fowleri. It is rare, but it does cause brain infection. It is considered to be the brain-eating amoeba. And the way you catch it is by breathing contaminated water up your nose, not by eating it, but by breathing it up your nose. And it gets into the neurons and migrates up into your brain. Now, it seems almost, way off out there and you see it on the news, but I actually had a student whose child and his best friend were both infected with this. They had not been to the lake. They had city water, so that wasn't the problem. Probably played in a dirty creek or a dirty ditch water, but the first child died, and in her child they made the diagnosis because of doing an autopsy on the first child. And her child lived. I don't know how much brain damage he had. I do know she dropped out of school. It was just too much. But these neti pots where people pour water up their nose and rinse it out, you have to use sterile water for those, because if you pour unsterile water up your nose, you could be pouring brain-eating amoebas in your nose, and you don't want those. Okay, this Apicomplexa plasmodium is a big one, and that's malaria, and we'll talk about that in detail later. Toxoplasma gondii, toxoplasmosis, and this is a two-host parasite, and cats are the primary host. They usually have it just maybe 10 days, and then it goes into meat. I was involved in a study in school where we looked at cat feces and at hamburger meat, and I unfortunately was on the cat turd collecting committee. We went to pounds, we went to veterinary clinics, and we collected up this cat feces. And then the teacher, of course, she had to spend her own money. She may have got reimbursed. She probably did. She bought a pound of hamburger of each brand from every grocery store in Athens. And we tested the cat poo and the hamburger meat. And the hamburger meat had a much higher rate of toxoplasmosis than did the cat poo, which means don't eat cat poo, but be careful about don't eat rare hamburger meat, but don't eat rare meat at all if you're pregnant. This is often fatal for a fetus or causes brain damage. So if you're pregnant, don't eat a whole lot of things, but cat poo being primarily one of them. But any kind of rare beef, certainly no rare pork, chicken, no meats that are not fully cooked, no soft cheeses, and those are for other diseases. Okay, slime molds. These are really fun. Similar to fungus, similar to an amoeba. Cellular slime molds we have pictures on the next page. Most of their life is single-cell amoeboid cells. Then when things get tough, maybe it gets dry, they come together and they form a slug-like creature that crawls away from the dry spot. I got a picture I'll show you in just a second. Plasmodial slime mold is a cell that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, thousands of nuclei. and it covers large areas as long as there's plenty of moisture. These grow out in the woods and stuff. You'd probably never know it if you stepped on one, and if you broke one in half, they just keep on growing. It wouldn't really hurt them. You just have two. But this is showing the cellular slime mold, and I'll go through. This is the happy life here. They're just going through the sexual reproduction here. But here it's getting dry, so they're coming together. They're making a slug, and he crawls, ding, 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 and he forms this stalk thing, and it gets longer and longer. And this sits up here. He sits there till it gets wet and put out spores, and then they form an amoeba. Helminths worms. Now these aren't microbes, but they're interesting to microbiologists because the way you diagnose them is often by their eggs or their larvae that are found in blood, feces, or urine. Life cycle is going to include fertilized eggs, larvae, and adult. And helminths, they are animals. Worms are animals. And a lot of them have an intermediate host and some don't. If you do have an intermediate host, the larval stage will develop in the intermediate host. Adulthood is going to be in the definitive or final host usually. Classification of helminths. We've been talking about strictly microscopic organisms, and we've not talked about animals. These are animals, and why we are interested in any of the worms is because their microscopic stages are the way we diagnose them. Platyhelminth, these are your flatworms. Come in trematodes, which are your lungworms, liver flukes, your lung flukes, liver flukes, blood flukes, and then tapeworms. Are not. And this is a tapeworm. Very rarely do they cause extreme damage and kill you. These do require an intermediate host, so you would have to eat whatever the intermediate host is for the particular type you have to catch it. Many of these are harmless. Now there are some that are actually dangerous, and I can't come up with a name right now. But scolex is a head, neck, and then these little proglottids, this is what they look like. They have uterus, testes, and then finally they mate with themselves, make eggs. And they can be differentiated by how many testes they have. Whereas it doesn't show the testes, these little testes. But if you have a cat or a dog and you see a little rice-looking thing that's wiggling on their butt, that's a tapeworm. And if you were to swallow that tapeworm, it's not going to do anything to you. Where the cat or dog got it is from chewing on themselves and getting fleas and actually swallowing an infected flea. Larval fleas will eat these proglottids and therefore become infected. So then the flea grows up, it bites the dog or cat scratches, they chew and they swallow the flea, they get infected. If you treat for the worms and you treat for the fleas, you're through with them, no problem. Have seen one or two cases where they caused an issue. Mostly they cause malnutrition because this just hangs on and this absorbs nutrients. At one point there was a diet plan of the guy who went to jail because it was a pretty big fraud thing, but he had two pills you take. One is a miracle diet pill, and it was it was a tapeworm, and you swallow this thing, an infective form of tapeworm, and then the second one was to kill the tapeworm. And that's where he got caught, because people would take the second pill and they'd start passing tapeworms. And anyway, he got in a lot of trouble. I did did an autopsy on a goat that was heavily parasitized. It had a lot of other parasites, but it had multiple tapeworms that were 5, 6, 7 feet long, and this was a small animal, maybe 30 pounds. Human ones can get, several meters long. Okay, nematodes. Anaerobius vermicularis. This is a pinworm, and it's from human to human. Uh, kids has them, scratch their butt. Mommy, kiss my finger, I heard it. Not a good plan. They touch things, touch doorknobs. Very common in small children to spread them to other people. I have a friend that's a third grade teacher, and she caught them from some of her kids at school, not by kissing their fingers. I mean, they float in the air and you breathe them and swallow them. And she just started passing worms, and she caught them, and her husband caught them from her. And they were both treated, and nobody came to any harm. You can buy the medicine over the counter, which is probably what I would do. Okay, Ascaris lumbricoides. This is a human roundworm. This is a very dangerous organism because not only does it infect the gut, but it can migrate throughout the body. It's a very dangerous worm. Necator americanus and Anslostoma duodenale are hookworms, and there are many species of hookworms, but these are the ones that are specific to humans. As far as we know, you're not going to catch adult hookworms from a dog or another animal. But this is the cutaneous larval migrans. So they were very common in humans from human hookworms when people ran around barefoot, went in a slop jar and threw it out the window, or stood by a tree. Now, hookworm larvae can crawl 6 feet. And so that's where they came up with the idea of making your outhouse needs to be 6 feet deep, the hole does, so the larvae can't crawl out. And it really helped a lot. But if you go to a beach where they have dogs crapping everywhere, the dog variety can invade your skin, and they'll die off. It'll eventually go away, but they're pretty disconcerting and can be nasty. That's why most beaches don't allow dogs on the beach. This is an adult hookworm. This attaches to the inside of your small intestine and sucks blood. And human hookworms can be very dangerous. They're almost unheard of in this country because of flushing toilets and running water. If one does not have flushing toilets and running water, very apt to get them. And there was a little child in Macon, and this has probably been 25 years ago, so she's an adult now. But a friend of mine who is a physician, he lives in a completely another part of the state right now. He lives up in North Georgia. He's retired, but he's a pediatrician. And he said this child, they did every test they could think of, and they couldn't find anything wrong with her, but she was dying. She was so anemic. And a nurse found one of these worms and put it in a jar, took it down to the lab. It was a hookworm. Treated her for hookworms, and of course I had to keep her hospitalized because she was so anemic. But she lived, she did fine, she grew up and went on to be an adult and healthy. Okay, so you don't expect them, but they can happen. And that's all for now.